Smart.
Perfect. Annette, could you please get us started by telling us, from your experience, which are the main challenges that young people face who would like to enter the Norwegian labor market?
I think the lack of experience is a challenge. It's just like Evelin said, that you are coming from the millennials, you have expectations, you have studied, but you don't actually have the experience, so it's the hen and the egg in a way. So to really have a flexible and a good environment to introduce the new labor force is crucial. But I also think that if you have that, it's you can create so much within a company, because the combination of having experts on one hand with a lot of experience in combination with the young mindset is an advantage. So I think that's kind of the key, that they lack the relevant work experience, and that most of the students, at least in Norway today, they come from kind of the service industry, so they don't have any experience, and we see that with students, especially from Norway. I would say that the students that work on our projects from other countries, they're often more, also they have actually maybe built into their studies a more collaboration with the public and private sector, like France and US, for instance. So,
Perfect. Didrik, I would like to ask you a question. Could you tell us about the project with a greater impact that have been initiated by the Earthpreneurs community?
Sorry, can you ask that again?
So you talked about the Earthpreneurs community, and you talked about the local chapters. Have there been any projects, or what has been the impact of the local chapters or the bigger Earthpreneurs community?
Well, for the events, it's more intangible, but that people are starting smaller gatherings to talk about sustainability. And, you know, these are from countries where you walk to school or work and you see these problems. It's not like in Norway where you have to learn about these problems. They just see most of them, you know, right in front of them. So it's like having them meet up and talk and discuss sort of how do we tackle this as a society. I think what Future Leaders is doing as well, bringing leadership courses all the way to places like Africa is what's needed to help shift the mindset in many countries, right? So Earthpreneurs, but some more specifically, you also have like Aquasolis Global, which found the ones that helped them get to Tanzania to get their first project up, which is now running. So yeah, there's a lot of potential if you are able to connect people.
Thank you. Evelin, what is the advantage of young talents or leaders entering the labor market?
I mean, I would focus on actually sustainability for this. I think that bringing sustainability into the core of business is so new that actually most educations, just to start there, didn't really exist before 3 to 5 years ago. So the people with most competency in terms of how to implement sustainability into business is actually young people. So I would say that that is basically, it's both an area where young people are believed in a sense, which is crucial to get into the labor market. And it's also a field in which young people has kind of a greater understanding to some extent. I would also like to kind of focus on the exponential thinking that I briefly mentioned. I think that a lot of young people, young talents, by just a way of living and growing up, has a an advantage in terms of understanding this growth, rather than people that kind of, I don't want, let me just stop there. But that hasn't seen the same development happening that fast growing up. Yeah.
Thank you. Ingrid, I would also like to ask you a question. With the service that you provide, are there any challenges that you commonly face while presenting the services to larger companies?
Yeah, so I was laughing when I saw your slide there in with the cats or the kittens, like it's a term, or herding cats, which is when you have to manage like very self-driven and opinionated people, and they want to go in all their own directions, which I think is typical for the younger generation. And as I also mentioned, like it's really hard to manage in the traditional way, so you need to build your leadership style on trust. And that is something that is very hard for a lot of people who have been in these old hierarchical organizations. They're used to kind of being able to control everything, and suddenly you have something that is very complex and people taking a lot of initiatives and doing a lot of things, or employees that are not in office, and that can sometimes be very hard to handle. And also for our service, if you're successful with using video, I think it's a lot about the trust and being able to build relationships with people, even though you're not going out for dinner or sitting in the same office and shaking hands like in the old times. I've worked with consultants who've helped me for 3 months before I met them in person. And I think that's also something that probably is key to your projects to succeeding, is being able to build trust between people virtually, without having to meet in person.
Evelin?
I just really support the idea of trust in the workforce, and I think this is kind of an important shift that is more and more crucial. Harvard Business Review did a very interesting study on it some years ago in terms of actually showcasing that for companies with a high degree of trust, they're 51% more efficient than companies with low degree of trust. And to me, that is just mind-blowing, because it really, really showcases so obviously that you need to flip around the way you work and to produce new ways where you really integrate the people to create efficient business.
Annette?
Yeah, just to continue on the trust and transparency. I think it's very interesting to see in our innovation project that when you actually tell the company that we give students the mandate to challenge you. We give them the mandate to challenge your business model, the way you're working, how you use or not use new technology in combination with existing technology, etc. It kind of makes them lean forward. And it's very interesting because it could still be a company where you think that the culture is maybe more traditional in a way. But and for the students as well, when they actually get that mandate and they're reminded that you can challenge the existing, you can bring new things to the table, it's a dynamic. It's like magic, especially when you have a framework and a process that allows it, and actually lead it in a way, lead it in phases. I think that's very interesting, and it has to do with trust, with transparency, and actually to be brave. So I think if you trust people, they will be more brave and they will produce differently.
Ingrid, you had a comment?
Yeah, I think there's a saying that you need juniors on a team to set the speed, because they run very fast and have lots of ideas, but then you need seniors to set the direction and the frames and boundaries that you talked about to get them to get all of that speed to go where you need it to go. So that's at least something that I've strived for in the projects that I've managed. And I think it's a challenge for companies as well to set up projects and teams in a good way to really exploit all the ideas and energy that young people have. and open up the mandate for questioning the traditional way of working. Another thing that is really interesting, which I see a lot of, is there are so many new tools that are coming out now that allows you to communicate much better, to visualize that work is happening even though you're not sitting together, and to collaborate in real time. You were using Google Docs, which is one of the tools, but there are so many tools. So it's way easier now than it was 3 or 5 years ago.
Didrik?
Yeah. So now I'm going to answer both of those. But the first one, where the combination of older, more experienced people with young, driven people who have new ideas, often dumb. Like, I think for every one good idea I have 99 bad ones. So trying to combine that, sometimes, at least when you're starting up your own company and you only have young people around you who also are super excited, it's very cool when everything is going like this. And then when stuff starts getting serious, you're like, where is the grown-ups? Like, oh yeah, shit, it's me, I'm 26. No, I'm grown up now, which is irritating sometimes, which also led me to the point of like saying, for people that would like to get the experience, which was mentioned we lack when we're young, is actually going to the startup. If you're, for example, studying law, everyone trying to get into like pushing papers and bringing coffee. No, go work for a startup. You literally are the one with the most knowledge about laws in the startup. Go get your job there. Like, work for free. Work voluntarily. Stop asking for money. Just go work for free in a company that you like and get the experience, because you're the boss on the legal department. Nobody knows anything. Right? You get all the responsibility. And it's not like you have to do everything. You just go to somebody that knows anything and you ask them if you don't know. Like, say yes and figure it out later. Like, is that Pippi Langstrømpe? Yeah? I don't know. But do like her, maybe. Second thing, sorry. Now I got to wrap it up. What was the second thing you talked about? You had like tools. 2 Tools, yes. We are. Like, we just showcased this on the exhibition on Monday, where there's something called Gravity Sketch on Oculus Quest, where you don't need any plugin. You can work remotely, and this is very expensive now, but like 1-2 years, it's going to cost so little that you can literally create 3D models, create products visually together from India to Norway. You can sit in the same VR room and make literally anything your imagination and skills allow for, and take that, download it into 3D model programs, finpusse litt, pusse.
Polish.
Fine polish it. Sorry, and once you've fine polished it, yes, and then you can actually 3D print it. So you can work on a product. You could 3D print like 2 hours later. I don't know how long that takes, but then you have your visual prototype in a sense. So that is the future. Is already here if you got a lot of money, but it's coming to those without money soon. So yes, tools are cool. Sorry for talking too long.
Another idea that I get now is the concept of mentoring. And there's an opportunity there as well to get grown-up guidance or ask someone that you admire. Maybe Larry Fink is a bit out of reach, but you could send him an email.
Always try.
Ask him to jump on a call, but a lot of people, senior people, will answer. The guy I showed, Børge, he sent an email to like the CMO of Facebook, and he got a reply. He had a video call with him. So ask them to discuss a problem with you, or if they have time to give you some advice. There are also mentorship programs. Like, I am mentoring a girl in Zurich, in Switzerland, in product management, over video. So it's suddenly the world is available to you.
Annette, was there a comment?
Yeah, no, I was thinking about like, how can we actually, because this is about change, like, okay, we're working with the United Nations development goals, but how to tackle and meet change, and how to embrace it, because we are going to face change in so many situations. Coronavirus, we have, how do we implement new technology in our business? How do you work more sustainable, like you said? And I think it's really crucial to think about how we work, how we spend our time, what kind of people we work with. So I think based on my experience working with all these companies and student teams is if you have really good processes and methods, it's crucial. And that you put together when you're going to go out there and actually work, and many of you are, how many students are there here, by the way? Yeah, that's what I thought. It's quite a lot. How many of you have a job? Okay. How many is working in the service industry? Not many. Oh, cool. But anyway, I think it's really crucial to set down teams that actually has diversity and with different expertise, young people with experienced people, experts with more like general people with general kind of competence, because that is a smart way to set down a team and then to work kind of not think that, oh, we have a year to implement a sustainability strategy. No, we don't have a year. We have 2 months, and we need to act on it. We need to get a budget. We need to get a team. We need one that is actually responsible, or several that are responsible for each of their areas. And we need to make an activity plan, to say it very kind of easily. You need a strategy, activities, a budget, and people that actually take responsibility to implement. And yeah, then I think things will happen. But I'm not so sure that there are a lot of companies today that are actually doing that. No, it's interesting.
I actually want to disagree with that. My experience is that most companies, actually do work on this, and they work on it rather lean, really forward thinking. I think that what I often see is that you have the top executive team, and they're primarily, and I would even say like almost always, really forward-leaning, pushing kind of everything ahead. And then the challenge is that middle managers has the most challenging job on the planet, because they're the ones that need to deliver on existing operations, and at the same time they understand that we need to really innovate. So I think that most companies are actually focusing on this, and they are doing it fairly lean, but it's really complex, and the bigger the company is, the harder it is. So yeah, I also, of course, understand what you're saying, and I agree to some extent, but I think it's important that we kind of just also have a realistic perspective here, that this is really hard.
Yeah, there's 2 layers to this. I agree there's a lot of companies. I've seen firsthand how Yara International has not only in top management level been able to go for a sustainability strategy and making themselves better, but all the way down to like everyone, like in the canteen, like how they are able to do that. But I've also been to many meetings where I had to explain what the SDGs are within the past couple of years. And if you go to Russia, you go to an event there, nobody knows what the SDGs are, like literally no one. Like, of course, there's people there, but like I was in this massive business forum with, thousands of people in Kazan, an OIC forum. Nobody knows what it is. There's many countries where literally none of the leaders have any clue. There's no strategy. There's absolutely no implementation happening. We have not done the work on a global level yet when it comes to it. Everybody agrees. You can actually look at statistic for this, like over 30-40% of the world still not, who has agreed to the Paris Agreement, still have no clue or plan of what they're doing. There's no implementation. It's not happening on a national level. Norway, of course, is a lot better than most other countries, but just Russia next to us has no idea what they're doing. So I think on some level, yeah, I think some companies are really showing it, and especially in Norway, I'm actually quite proud to see a lot of the, like, live here with so many companies, and as Evelin points out, the complexity is insane. And we need to not point always the fingers, which I feel like a lot of students who read the first book about sustainability and they're like, hey, I think it's important to go in, work with them, help them. Like you show the cases from Equinor. They've been building this country for us almost. So let's try to help them to the transition rather than pointing all the fingers all the time. So yeah, it's a good mix.
Annette?
Really interesting where we are in the world today, because we're facing a big shift. We're in the kind of fourth revolution. There's technologies, there are circular economy, and we need to adapt and make changes. And yes, it's very complex, but at the same time, we need to be brave and include the young generation. And I would say that it's really important to stand up and actually be an agent of change, to dare to be a rebel, to actually, of course, be strategical and good in how we approach this. But at the same time, we will never change if we don't try. And if we fail, that's great, because then we learn something and we have a lot of experience from the evaluation of why we failed, and then we do it differently. So I don't think we should sit and kind of hesitate. I think it's really important to try to define what do we need to improve, where are what's the pain point, and make a good definition of how can we be more sustainable. How can each and everyone, both the student side and the companies, try to work together and having these great goals. And I do agree with you that I think in companies today, it's very challenging, but at the same time, everyone knows that it's a need for change. We need to act. So, yeah, you have great impact. Students use it, and companies embrace it.
Evelin, you had a comment?
I just think that kind of like, to some extent, this is some core of an important conversation, because at least with like all us young people in the room, I think that this should be kind of an important talking point when thinking about sustainability, because what I often see is that young people are kind of like standing and screaming like everything is wrong. You're all doing it wrong. And I think that for some, that might be the correct approach, and it might be a smart approach. But I think one thing that is important to remember or talk about in a forum like this is the importance for all young people to be aware of which position and role they're taking in the larger debate. So you can be an activist and you can have major influence by being an activist. Then you will, like, your role, your job is to point out all the things that does not work. So if you're an activist, go do that. If you decide to be a bridge builder, you need to take on that role very seriously. So you need to say, like, okay, so this activist says this, you as the CEO of this large corporate says this, now my role is to bridge build between this, and you need to be more of a politician. And then maybe you're an entrepreneur or like something else, but I think that is maybe some of the most important things to reflect on if you're a young either person in work or student or whatever, is just to be aware of which role do you choose, because you can choose, but be aware so that you can kind of make smart choices compared to that role and that approach.
I just wholeheartedly agree with that. I think we, in YSI, we made something we call 4 lenses of innovation, where you have, one of them is social, you have political, you have technical and scientific. So the knowledge, the building of stuff, the political aspects, lawmaking, and the social push. So social would be like Greta Thunberg, you know, technical will be a physical solution or a technical solution. And just like you said, like, figuring out when you're solving a problem, we need everything. We need Greta Thunberg to push, and then we need someone to make solutions. So it's a combination, and that collaboration is happening whether we like it or not. So stop, you know, figuring out who to work with and so on based on that image is probably smart. And also, can I get water? Yeah.
Water. Evelin, I'll give you the last word. Just be quick before we open up for the audience to ask questions.
Okay, cool. I just kind of wanted to, because we've been talking a lot about sustainability, and what I'm very passionate to kind of bring into the conversation these days is that now the last 5 years we've kind of gotten to some extent this like global understanding of the need for sustainability towards kind of the SDGs and all of that. There's still so much work to be done there, so that is one choice. Then I also just want to highlight the other choice that is now like very highly appearing in terms of like the fall of democracy, the challenges of the ethical solutions behind artificial intelligence, like both in elections, etc. So there's also like a whole conversation to be had there. And I think that if you're a student, if you're entering the workforce now, make a strategical choice. Do you kind of want to be on the sustainability wave, or do you want to be on the next wave? And that will kind of be as global understood in 5 years as sustainability is today. So then you'll kind of be the forefront runner. And if you're like on sustainability, that is kind of like, it's kind of accepted to some extent right now. So that's also a differentiation that I would be very aware of if I was entering the workforce right now.
Yeah, I think we can open up for questions by the audience. So Hamsika, please.
I just have a question, Ellie. What do you mean by sustainability and politics? I don't understand the way you divide those two. Just to get a clarification. Yeah, because you were talking about the sustainability path, and then you're talking about the political path. What do you mean? That is very intertwined.
Okay, I'm glad you're catching me on this. So I did simplify a lot here. Both of them are sustainability, but I do think that it's two shifts within sustainability. So there are now some global trends that we're seeing. For instance, what I talked about in terms of the decline of democracy, which I personally find that everyone should read up on because it's really, really impacting the environment that we live in, both like that and polarization and all of these things. And I think the way I see it that makes it different, even though it's a lot of the same, is that it is where sustainability is about the structures and systems have been working one way and we need to implement another way of doing it. This other thing is that the new solutions are being implemented and we're not focusing on it. So, for instance, with artificial intelligence influencing democracy, that is happening to a large extent, and we're not discussing that. We're not having the conversation. There's such limited people making those decisions and having the influence there. So I would say that, like, for the political things, like, it is being implemented and we need to talk about it more, while as the sustainability, it's like it has been a way and now we're all kind of saying that this needs to be done another way again.
Okay, I think I understand what you mean, but it's also extremely important to maybe not like give that definition. I think that's where the problem lies when we talk about sustainability as one thing and then the political part, because that's super intertwined. And if we are being able to reach the Sustainable Development Goals and even talk about the SDGs and sustainability, that is into the politics. That's like extremely important to not like try to divide it, because it's not two different paths. It's one path which is connected both with the sustainability and the political way of working towards a sustainable future. Just a comment. But my initial question was, I worked for an engineering union for a year ago, and then we had a Skype meeting where we were invited through a calendar invite where you were supposed to just click on a button and then get to be a part of the meeting. So I was sitting with engineers in that meeting where people are around 50 years old, but it took us 25 minutes before we actually managed to start the meeting. So I was sitting there because I was shocked in a way, and then I didn't understand the situation while the technician was running back and forth, and it took him again 25 minutes. So the meeting was postponed for an hour because they weren't able to use the technology in one of Norway's biggest technological union. So what are the issues you guys are seeing, since you are, you have been talking about innovation, you're talking about technology and, bridging the gaps, which is great, but this is the situation from my experience for a year. If you could just comment on that.
Yeah, I can comment. So that's basically the reason we started our company, because we want to solve that problem and make video meetings easy. So you should actually be able to click a link and immediately join. But I think it's also about making technology accessible to everyone, not just even engineers have problems, but I think making it accessible to a teenage girl or your grandmother, and it's about the way you design it. And I think that was also what you were trying to say, Evelin, that there's a whole new set of challenges when we allow technology into our lives in that way and build our whole work life on it. We also rely on it, and we need to understand the limitations of it, and we need to understand how data is being gathered, how it's being used, how we're vulnerable by using technology. And I think that's also something that's very important in the labor market, to have more diversity in tech, because it's said that there's going to be a divide in the future between the people who really understand technology and the people who just consume technology. And I think especially women are at the risk of falling into the consumer category. So there's the percentage of women in tech, and especially female founders, is very low. I think even here in Norway, which is one of the most equal countries in the world, I think it's not even 10%. I think it's more like 2% of startup founders are female. So I think that's a huge problem. And if you look at IT engineers, it's probably also 10% to 90 or something like that. So I think it's really important that we make IT companies and IT jobs more available to women and people from different backgrounds. And I think they can also contribute to making the tech work better in people's lives and the way we design it.
A question in the back there.
Yeah, my question is for future leaders. I know a lot about the work you do, and congrats for that. And I think one thing interesting that I found in your presentation was you spoke about how middle management is so important, but my question is directed towards the future being non-inclusive to a generalist versus a specialist. What I mean is that today there's never been a time where engineers or hardcore skilled workers have been more important, and I think thought leadership, which was ideally what was a generalist kind of role, has become intrinsic, and it's kind of taking over that. Do you think that it's going to be a shift where thought leadership becomes part of a specialist kind of role, and this becomes sort of obsolete, and then for us to move into more of a specialist kind of skill set than being a generalist? Or do you think that the generalist is always going to be there?
Thank you, and thank you for the comments on future leaders. Now, I would say that the trends that we're seeing is that where the need is like growing kind of drastically is there is a need for people that can further solve and understand complex realities. There's a need for people that are good at communicating and a lot of like the very, very soft skills. Now that is like a very kind of still the generalistic approach. And to some extent that is still going to be important to tie together the specialists. When talking about the experts and the specialists, I would say that there's two components. First, I and we, to an enormous extent, look at those people as leaders because they are leaders within their field, and that understanding that they have is crucial to push things forward. So that's the first one. And then the second one is that there's a really, really big difference in terms of specialists and specific tasks, if you know what I mean. And the differentiation that I'm doing there is that some specific tasks can be and will be autonomized and will probably and already are seeing that robots and technology are taking over those jobs. But when it comes to specialists that do understand one topic in detail, that is rising in terms of need. Now that I have the word, I hope that was an answer. I just also want to kind of answer because I really, really enjoy having that conversation. And I understand what you're saying, and I to some extent agree, but I also think that there's the importance of remembering that you lead an organization focusing on sustainability. So you would know the difference, like you would know that the political and the democratical and all of those aspects are involved in sustainability. Now, many people, as Didrik talked about, don't even know what sustainability means. And I think for those people, it is important that we kind of, like, not necessarily separate it, but that we talk about, like, different things and that we make, like, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. But I think it was really good that you kind of said that I was wrong, and I think I was. But I think there's a lot of different narratives there that is important to kind of, involve.
Yeah, I think the point here is that you have this, like if I was in Russia and I was like, so are you guys working on SDG 8 or how's that going? They wouldn't know what to mean. So like if you talk objectively about stuff, and it's also the fact that fixing our democracy or systems or AI is actually not part of the Sustainable Development Goals. You read through the targets. I actually dare everyone to do that. Read through the targets and the indicators if we're reaching the targets. They're very specific, and it's nothing about AI. It's nothing about many things that are still important to solve and work on. So I think both are right. It's important to be talking objectively. This is why when I talk about YSI, I never talk about the SDGs. Almost never, even though that's the framework we're basing stuff on. But we're talking about solving real problems that we have identified, right? So we're not actually talking about SDG 6. Or I like that SDG a lot, but like other SDGs, like not always. And
just to shortly add on that, I think that it is important to remember that the SDGs are defined and agreed upon by all nations in the world. Now, for that to be possible, that is going to exclude a whole lot of topics. And I think that Oslo Freedom Forum and Alex Gladstein are like extremely good at like putting this kind of challenge with the SDGs up in all forums, because there are challenges with them, and like it's not to be said that democracy is the right form, or that like any other leadership style or regime is the right form, but there's those are not in the SDGs because the world couldn't agree to put them in the SDGs.
So I have a question from Chris Ashby on Twitter. He says he has a question for the innovation effect. He sees the value for students, and it's a great opportunity, but can you talk about how happy the companies were in having student teams? Did they see the value?
Yeah, I think they overall see a great value because they are bringing new insight and new solutions to a problem or a challenge with their new kind of thinking. And I think, like the question here with kind of bridging leaders that have experience, and that is representing an older generation with the young generation, and to actually have focus on, like, again, sustainability is really important. This kind of combination of young minds and more experienced leaders to actually think big, start small, but I think that we all need to have focus on sustainability, and there's many ways to do it. Yeah, I think students bring value, definitely, in our projects.
Yes, I wanted to make a question about foreign students. What has been done? You have mentioned that you have collaborators all over the world who are students. I wanted to know what has been done to bridge the gap, the cultural language gap in those cases, and what do you think are the biggest challenges that foreign students face when they go to the Norwegian job market nowadays? No, it's directed to anybody. It's not nobody in particular.
Yeah, I've been working with several people that are from abroad and living in Norway with the usual story of finding love, and I feel really bad about the hardship they're facing. I think Norway is a very country where you should learn the language. So honestly, if you fall in love, you stay here, go to Norwegian course as fast as possible, because honestly, it makes everything easier. So I'll just do that. Other than that, I think, go find companies that have a diverse group already. It's very difficult to come into like a fully Norwegian team of 5 people, even though we've been doing it in YSI, but it's not happening everywhere. So try to find diverse backgrounds in the teams already and be good at something always helps.
Any other comments from you guys? Anything you'd like to add?
I think that whether you're kind of entering the Norwegian labor market, coming from a different culture, or being kind of native Norwegian, I agree. You really have to work and sell yourself in and present your background and your knowledge and skills in a way that is kind of appealing and selling, and make sure that you have experience. And then if there's something you study or something you really are passionate about, I think the other part will appreciate that. So yeah, that's one advice. But I see that there can be challenges, and of course, if you go for companies that has a very diverse workforce, that is probably smart.
One of their partners, Yara International, like to DGF, they have an extremely diverse work group.
have a question in the back.
Hi guys, thanks for some good presentations and a good debate here. I have a question which I believe will be a bit tricky, but I'll ask it. Let's say it's an assumption, but also just follow this thought experiment. I personally think that every human being to some extent has good intentions in what they're doing. So if anyone has good intentions, it might be on different levels. Let's say I have good intentions for me or my personal circle or my country or the world as it is. And there is also the thing about in the SDGs, they're not necessarily always compatible. So if you have a good intention in version of solving one of them, you might have poor consequences for something else. So I wonder, is there anything you think of as which level of good intention should you be at, or how do you build bridges between the different types of good intentions? So good intentions for, let's say, Subaru's company mates in India, for example. I don't know how they work, but it's like they have very different good intentions than, for example, we have here in Norway, if we try to look at solving sustainability challenges.
Not sure if I fully got it, but like you do something that is particularly good for some reason, but usually has a bad effect. So like YSI flies in a lot of people, so we create, we teach people how to be entrepreneurs, which is good for later. We have some companies that make some impact, but on the other side, we fly in people, which is bad for the environment. So I think you need to realize that if you're, and this is part of what I don't like about Norwegian companies working on the SDGs, is that they're always like, look at the amazing stuff we're doing. There's literally one company which is called Oatly. They just did this massive posters like, show us your numbers, food industry. And that's so much fun because they're always like, go watch their ads. It's online, it's so much fun. You see them in the street, it's always a good time. They're like, here's an ad, buy me. Doing fun stuff, but also they show their numbers, bad and good, and shows obviously that they're much better than the others, and nobody has taken, Oatly's challenge yet. So that's one thing, like Oatly is amazing, and I think I'm inspired by that definitely, is trying to map our negative consequences and how can we minimize that as much as possible, or what can we invest in, like Cool Earth, for example, which takes care of large areas of the rainforest, stuff like that. So yeah, trying to look at both good and bad and do like Oatly. Be honest.
Yeah, really interesting question and a bit philosophical, but I think we need all those good intentions. Like each and every one of us come from a place and we have some resources at our disposal and some skills, and we all try to use those to our best ability in the place that we are at. And I think we need lots of small ants solving lots of small problems, and that will just add up. And like Ellen talked about the exponentiality, it's not always easy to predict the outcome of something that you do. So when you start rolling a snowball, does it stop or does it turn into a big avalanche? And I think the Oatly example is a really great one. Maybe that initiative, maybe it doesn't go anywhere, but maybe it also completely changes the food industry to be more sustainable. So, yeah, I think everyone should do what they can, and we shouldn't kind of compare to each other that much, because we come from different places and we have different problems. Here in Norway, we have first world problems. That doesn't mean that they're not worth solving, and I think they all have value.
I'll let Ellen go first.
So I would say there's, like, following up on both you guys, I would almost say that there's kind of two aspects to this. So it's like doing good, if that is within an already established company, system, structure, it is going to be complex. And I think in that case, there's kind of a responsibility to acknowledge, for everyone to acknowledge that it is complex and that it will take time and a lot of consideration to make good impact. I would say the best example of this is like Norwegian oil. Like, when do we cut it? Because we know that like we need to cut the oil in terms of environmental reasons, but what will that do with our welfare? And some people might say that, well, the planet is more important, and some will say that, well, I'm not comfortable with giving up my perfect life for that. And both of those are like experienced realities. So for some situations, they are so complex and it will influence so many people that at least there's an importance to keeping to not simplify. I think there's a real importance and a responsibility to not simplify the discussions too much. And then people can have different opinions, but that's one way of it. And then I would say the other one is, for instance, the Oatly example, which is just like, if you're in a position where you can start something completely new, or you can launch something completely new into a market or a system or whatever, then with that, it comes a lot of responsibility to do it the right way in the core from the start. For instance, the Oatly way. So I think like there's a real importance to remember like what exists and how do we like reshape that into something that works in the future, and what can we just like reimagine and kind of create where that slow and kind of equaling it out is not that important.
I actually forgot one point. I'll try to be quick. But I think there's a core problem regarding the topic of this session that we haven't really touched on, and that is the big problem is going to be how are we going to replace all the jobs that are going to be disappearing with technology? And I don't think there's a good answer, but I do know that lots of small initiatives are going to be needed to try and fail, and maybe some of them become big companies and hire 3,000 people, which Telenor is now going to cut their staff with. So I don't think we're even close to being able to replace the number of jobs that will be cut if we cut oil, for example. And we do know that unemployment is one of the biggest causes of social riot and poverty, and there's just so many bad effects from unemployment. So that's also something we need to take into consideration when talking about innovation.
A question, because this is a question that all the corporates have got during the last 3 years we have had this forum, but I'm curious to ask, you know, organizations and startup working specifically towards the SDGs, where can you do better? What can you do differently?
I think for us, and this is something that I'm working a lot with these days actually, is communicating how we can help other people be more sustainable. For us, we are a tool and we need people to use us to get impact. Like, we're a very small team, we're 25 people, so kind of our footprint alone is very low, but the potential we have to making people stop flying or employing someone in a different country where unemployment is high is much more impactful. But we need to kind of get the message out, get people to understand how they can change by using us.
Was there a comment?
No, I can.
For us, I think we're working on that now, where we try to make our program more scalable. So it's more about not having to go to other places, but still have quality in the education of entrepreneurship. So we're working on making a scalable digital platform that in another way helps people run qualitative innovation programs across the world. So yeah, so we don't have to travel so much.
I think we are we had a great discussion before or when we got invited to be here today, to actually have more focus on what does it mean for the innovation effect to be sustainable, what kind of course we're working with the number 9 goal, but how can we work more actively with it towards our students in our projects, highlight it, maybe make it you know, an area. We do so, but be even more focused to say that this is one of the discussions we're going to have. We're going to look at, okay, we have developed a new concept, great, but how sustainable is it? And have a 360 on that. So I think I got really inspired by you know, preparing to this session, and we'll bring it back to to the team.
I'll give Evelin the last word.
Yeah, we're actually perfect, so
We're so sustainable.
no, we're not. I think that actually it's primarily two things. First, I would say that Future Leaders was founded to some extent, make young people understand and connect more with implementing sustainability at the core of whatever leadership it is that they're doing. I would say that we've been really, to some extent, like not delivering on that before like the last year, because our program, the first phase of it, was really so much about self-leadership and understanding that aspect. And we needed to kind of figure out like some core of what we were about. So it's been a learning curve. And first, like this year, like some weeks ago, was the first time where I was like, okay, so now maybe we're starting to implement the sustainability part in the programs. But we still really have a lot of things, like a long way to go there in terms of how do we actually create and develop and mobilize that take more responsibility and actually can think of sustainability in a new way. So I would say all actually forget, like that's the core, yeah.
Thank you. I think that's what we had time for today. So I would like to thank the panelists for your presentation, but also for sharing your experiences and perspectives on the topic that we have discussed